Sometimes it's nice to not break the bank. Welcome back to the Scale Builders Guild. Thanks again for watching. Today we're taking a different approach at building an SCX24, and I am not an expert in this by any means. I've already gone through the process of spending a lot of money on upgrading one of these with this guy here, and this is not proving to be a cheap project. For how big it is, you would expect to not spend as much, but you can spend a lot of money, and we'll get into all of the costs later on in this video. But this little comp build is really expensive. So with that in mind, I thought, how much of this upgrade path do we really need to go down? I decided to start with a $109.99 SCX24 base camp. And I wanted to try to build something a little more comp inspired without breaking the budget. Josh and I have already done budget build SCX24s, but those were a long time ago. Things have changed dramatically in that short amount of time, and these have proven to be very popular with the aftermarket community. There are tons of manufacturers, tons of homebrew kits, tons of accessories, tons of upgrades, tons of things, all for the SCX24 platform. And Axial's done an excellent job of promoting and building a brand all around this tiny little truck. But let's be honest, out of the box, they're not that great. I mean, they're great if you are new to this hobby or if you've got kids that are looking to get into this hobby. It's a great, cheap entry point to get people excited about radio control crawlers. There's nothing wrong with that. That's good. However, all of us professionals, or top-rated amateurs, as I'd much prefer to call myself, like to take things a different way and make things a little bit better. And that's what I've tried to do here with this little guy, but without spending all of the monies. We'll focus on the money later, but let's talk about what we did here to try to improve the performance of the base camp right out of the box. And out of the box, it's a nice, mildly capable little trail truck. I'm not going to call it a true rock crawler because none of these SCX24s are very good out of the box at rock crawling. But we've tried to make some improvements here and there with this guy. I'll go through everything that I've done and share all of the pricing as we go as well. All right, so first and foremost, you can see that this is no longer the original base camp body. I do actually quite like this little pickup truck body. I think they did a really good job, not just in the 24 scale, but also in the 10 scale model. I think it is a pretty good looking body, and I probably could have put some sort of grill in the back or pizza oven or whatnot, but I decided to go a different route, and I got the Proline Cherokee body. I do quite like this Cherokee body. However, it's not really stock anymore, as you'll soon see. It's gotten quite a few cuts. When this body first came to me, of course, it's a clear Lexan body, and that does remind me I'll have to reset that counter. That's better. I painted this mostly with Tamiya paint using the Lame Flake, which gives you a nice rainbow flake effect throughout the whole paint, and we'll see if we can get that to sort of show up on the camera lens, maybe, maybe not. All the stars in the universe, man. Whoa. Then I gave it a spray of black around the edges and some fluorescent blue, which I then backed with black to give me this nice dark navy. I think it's a pretty unique color, definitely something you can't get off the shelf, and quite happy that it turned out the way it did. I then added some of my Red Moose stickers just to give it a bit of a livery, sort of a competition-inspired livery. And of course there's a bumper sticker as well, which I don't think we'll be able to focus on, because it's pretty, there it is. This is a tiny, tiny truck. It did get a pretty extensive comp cut on this body, mostly because we've done a number of upgrades, including an entirely different chassis. No longer is this just a regular axial base camp. I'll say whether or not this body is an upgrade is up to interpretation. I think it is, because you've really reduced the overhang. There is no fenders at all, so you can run a much larger wheel and tire combo if that's something that you wanted to do. And it does definitely give you more clearance because there's a lot less body to worry about. There's no bumpers, there's no fenders, there's hardly any doors. not the most scale-looking vehicle I've ever built, but it certainly is one of the more compy ones I've ever built. Now, of course, I did decide to go with a larger tire here. This is the Proline Super Swamper. These initially come pre-mounted on a set of plastic beadlock wheels, which are totally acceptable. They have a nice sort of faux beadlock ring, which I think actually makes them look quite cool. However, one of the upgrades I did want to do is add more weight down low. So the first thing I did here after the body mod was add a set of rock shooter brass wheels. These are from Proline as well. They include a brass clamp ring, brass outer wheel, and brass inner portion to beadlock onto these tires. I also replaced the foams inside with Proline dual stage SCX24 size foams. And now we've got a much heavier, much better looking set of wheels and tires that I think are going to perform great. This Super Swamper is a pretty decent tire in all scales. I presume it's going to do quite well in this scale. Because I've cut the Lexan bumper off, I did want to have some sort of front bumper up front. And I think this one from DeMello Off-Road that's on the base camp actually looks pretty good with the Cherokee after we've done that cut. So I left it. But that's about it for what stays stock on the rest of this chassis. This chassis is 3D printed, and this one's actually from my friend Josh over at Harley Designs. He made this for the original budget build, and it's free on Thingiverse. So in terms of budget, you can't really beat that. All you have to do is go to Josh's page, download the files, load them up on your 3D printer or possibly a friend's 3D printer, and you've got everything you need to totally replace every piece of a stock SCX24 chassis. He gives you the front body mount. The way he's designed this chassis, most bodies should fit pretty easily. There is a clamping rear bumper assembly that also has a couple of grub screws screwed into it, which then slots right into place on the rear bumper assembly on the chassis. And then you use one 3mm screw up front to lock that whole thing in place. It's a nice, quick, easy way to get at everything, and it's a really nice functional way of getting a bumper onto your body as well. What I like about this chassis is that it keeps everything in a fairly low CG sort of situation. As you can see, I'm using all of the stock electronics, the stock steering servo, the stock motor, stock transmission, stock battery, stock 2-in-1 ESC receiver combo, but I have decased that whole unit. So now it takes up a lot less space, weighs a lot less, but still has all the functions that you need. At some point in the future, I will probably end up upgrading some of these electronics, but for right now, out of the box and keeping it nice and cheap, but adding stuff to make this truck better, seemed like the right move. You don't always need to just plop everything on a truck. It gets very expensive that way. We're still using the same plastic links, plastic drive shafts, plastic axle housings. All of the housings inside are stock. There's really not a lot changed mechanically because, like I said, the idea here was to improve performance over time. This is a great way to start because it's not a super expensive way to go. You don't even need to do all the things I did first go. You could even slow down and take your time and do more of these things over time as your budget allows. This chassis is great. I'm really happy with how it's laid out. I like where the battery now sits, much lower on the chassis. You could even probably get it even lower or more up front if you wanted to. You could just swap positions where it is now, put it up over here. There's lots of possibilities. Whatever your driving style or wherever you are driving this truck might suit different layouts on this chassis. Josh also offers a ton of shock mounting positions, which gets us into our next upgrade, which is the shocks. These are also from Proline. They're the big bore SCX24 scalar shocks. They do hold oil and they do come with 2 different spring rates in the package, which I think is fantastic. It really lets you tune these shocks to suit the vehicle that you're putting them on. And because there are so many different mounting locations on this chassis, as you can see, there really are endless possibilities to how this could be set up. I thought it was an excellent way of showing off this great chassis. So I printed it in 2 different colors. I used denim PLA carbon fiber based for the actual rails, and then black carbon fiber based PLA for the rest of the pieces. I think it just kind of really sets the whole thing off and gives it a little touch of uniqueness. One thing to note about those big bore scalar shocks, they do hold oil, but they do not come with oil. So they do recommend 5 to 6 drops of 20 weight oil, and that's pretty much all you'll need to get a much smoother action on these shocks. Now, for the sake of this vehicle, I put the firmer shock springs up front and I left the stock ones in the rear just to give a bit more flexibility when needed. I think it's tuned pretty well so far. Of course, this is all just on the bench tuning, so we'll have to take it out and see how it does at some point. And for a little bit of extra unsprung weight, because unsprung weight is very important in any crawler, especially when you get into this super small scale stuff, I did add some brass knuckles up front. These are the axial brass knuckles, and they're just a nice, super easy upgrade. You don't need to change anything here. Take off the existing knuckle, replace with the brass ones, and you're good to go. And like I said, stock electronics for now, and we've got a much more comp-inspired SCX24 all set and ready to go. I wouldn't say I'm a beginner when it comes to SCX24s. I have had a lot of these over the years, and I have done a number of builds with them over the years as well. And there's always a different way to improve performance. And I think that's why these appeal to so many people, is that there is such a huge glut of possibilities out there to make these your own. Like I said, you can make an SCX24 a pretty wild build if you want. This one is coming along quite nicely. But I will say it's not been cheap. I haven't even factored in the cost of the servo on this yet, and we're already approaching $700 for this. Let's say you started with the base camp, which at $109.99 is a fantastic deal. That's still a lot of money to spend on something that small. Not only did I not factor in the servo on that budget, I also didn't factor in the body and the 3D files required to actually print this one out. So it's expensive. That's definitely over $750 right there. And that kind of blows my mind a little bit, because this little guy, once you pay for the base camp at $109, you're spending about half of that money, if that. $43.99 for the big bore 24 scale shocks, $37.99 times 2 for the Rock Shooter brass beadlock wheels, $25.99 for the Cherokee body, $41.99 for the brass knuckles, and $29.99 for the Super Swampers, which do come with a set of plastic beadlocks as well. So if you have another SCX24, you can always transfer those over to that. $0 for the chassis upgrade, which I think is a really phenomenal deal, because chassis upgrades aren't cheap for these things. You can spend $50, $60, you can spend $100 on one of those if you wanted. So all in so far, we're at $326.95, which I think is pretty reasonable. I mean, let's be fair. Nothing is cheap anymore. Everything's gotten more expensive. It's certainly better than the $600 plus I've spent on the other one. I should print some of those obstacles so we can make a little course for these guys that's easy to put away. I know it's a weird look. The comp look on the back, the comp cut on a Cherokee SUV body does look pretty weird. But I gotta say, it's growing on me. Like a fungus. Just having a larger tire on there has helped a lot already. And the comp cut on the body certainly helps, so you don't hear any of that Lexan rattling around either. I think another good upgrade would be a overdrive or underdrive system, whether you add an overdrive gear set to the front axle or an underdrive gear set to the rear axle. Having those front tires pull a little bit more up over an obstacle is definitely going to help a lot. That's certainly something that I would look at as well, and not an expensive upgrade to make either. Speaking of other great ways to spend your budget, you might want to consider joining the channel membership here on the Scale Builders Guild, where I offer all sorts of behind-the-scenes content, tips and tricks, travel logs, special members-only live streams, all sorts of great extra content, in addition to all the other great already free content that we have here on the Scale Builders Guild. Definitely consider joining. Lots of ding-dongs have. You could be one of these ding-dongs. And thank you to all of these ding-dongs for being ding-dongs. All right, back to this. Back to this tiny truck here. My thanks to Proline for sending along some of these upgrades so we could do this little video. I think this is going to be possibly a new rabbit hole for me to descend down and spend time in. Come join me in my hole. So there you go. That's a first little look at this little guy. I think we'll be doing some more with this in the future. And honestly, it wouldn't be the Scale Builders Guild if we didn't get a hard body on there. So if you've got a great idea for a hard body, or you've got a great idea for what the next upgrade should be, put a comment down below. You know I love reading through your feedback, and I try to answer as many of those comments as I can. I've been trying to expand my horizons and spend a little more time with these 24 scale trucks. They don't initially speak to me, but if I can get creative and start flexing my creative muscles a bit, I think there's a lot of potential here. And certainly there's a ton of other amazing channels out there that are doing great stuff with SCX24s. I'll put a link to a few of them down below. All right, I think that's going to do it though. Thank you so much for paying attention throughout all of this video. Thanks again to everybody for watching. We'll see you again soon.